My presentation this evening is timely for the holidays. One of the things that my wife and I have discovered over the years is that there's a silent majority of people that struggle to get through the holidays without overeating. Can anybody relate to that? Right? And so my presentation tonight is to address that very issue. How can we get through the holidays without overindulging, without eating too much? How do we accept an invitation to someone's home that we know it's going to be difficult, it's going to be hard? I've got some tips and some scriptural truths to help you and to empower you to be able to get through the holidays, making wise choices, making better choices, and maybe even becoming a leader within your sphere of influence. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to start just by stating the obvious. There's a storm coming. A tsunami of sugary treats and decadent meals. In fact, according to some studies or some reports, the average person will consume about 7,000 calories in just 3 holiday meals. Now think about that. Do you really need that many calories? No, of course not. But that's the nature of the storm that we're headed. For me personally, I really can't remember, but having one turkey dinner in 10 years when I was a kid. It must have been, maybe I was 8 or 9 years old, and we celebrated Thanksgiving, and my parents prepared the turkey and all the fixins, and that was it. 10 years went by, and we never did that again. I might add that part of that time we spent in South America, where the standard American diet is an alien idea, and they don't celebrate Thanksgiving in Colombia. But when we returned, still, there was something in what I learned in that other culture that allowed me to see our culture through different eyes. So part of what I'm going to share with you tonight is going to have that perspective. So one of the things that I encountered when we returned to the States is this pressure to participate, right, in the holiday seasons, in the holiday traditions. And I remember that when I was making some better choices, some wiser choices in what I ate, I would get pushback. And I remember I still hear these voices. Sam, it's tradition. It's Thanksgiving. Live a little, right? I mean, how many of you heard that, right? And so I got to thinking, all right, well, how many turkey dinners does it really take for me to affirm my American identity, right? I mean, let's get real here. How many times, how much does it take? So for me, I realized that it's not about our national identity. It's about claiming our heavenly identity right here, right now. And by having that perspective of why we're here, it's going to enable us to make wiser choices going through. So my presentation is going to consist of 4 ways in which you can survive the season and master these holiday food temptations. Are you all ready? All right. One of the astounding things about our society and the time in which we live is that we live in an age of illusion. This image here demonstrates just how amazing how powerful the technology is. This image on the left looks like a photograph, but it's really a computer-generated person, and you can't tell the difference. You just cannot tell. My point is that we have come to a place where the illusions, the deceptions are rampant. And it hasn't happened overnight. This is an ad for a tobacco product back in the 50s. Now, what's wrong with this picture? I mean, we have history to tell us that this is not right. They're not selling health. I don't know what they're selling, but this obviously is intended to deceive. And we need to be aware of what some of these deceptions are so that we can be prepared to make better choices as we head into the holiday season. Let's take one example that I think we can all relate to. One of these is a counterfeit bill. Can you tell the difference? No, you really can't. You don't know which one is the fake and which one is real. But did you know that federal agents are trained to spot the counterfeit bills? And do you know how they're trained to do it? They are never shown the counterfeit bill. They are only shown the authentic original. And in that way, when the counterfeit bill does come across their desk, they can spot it right away. And the same thing is true for our health. And the same thing is true with our food. We need to study what is real food, what is true health, so that we can be privy to those messages that are deceptive. Does that make sense? So let's play a little game, just so that we can kind of get an idea of how pervasive the indoctrination is. So the game is going to go like this. There's 3 statements, and I want you to get a piece of paper and write them down or figure them out in your head. And when you have the answer of all 3, I want you to raise your hand, and the winner is going to get a prize. Do you want me to help you with the little tune that goes with it? Or a little enunciation?
2 or 3. The last one I know is.
Who's got all 3? Anybody? I guess I'm going to have to keep the prize. Okay. All right. Who knows the first one? Okay. What is it? Tricks are for kids. Right. Who knows the second one? Sometimes you feel like a nut?
Almond Joy.
Almond Joy's got nuts? Mounds don't. Absolutely. The third one. The best part of waking up is Folgers in your cup. How many years has it been since we've seen these commercials, and yet they're on the tip of our tongue? That gives you a glimpse into just how pervasive the indoctrination is in our culture. And I would venture to say that our perception of reality is heavily influenced by 3 major players: government, corporate America, and big pharma, and Hollywood. And a lot of times we're not even aware. We don't even know. So what do we do with this? And just to add a little urgency or a sense of reality check, the food industry spends about $5 billion a year to advertise to kids. Do you know how much they spend advertising broccoli and onions? It's a fraction of that, a minute percentage. So we have some big guns aimed at our kids. So what are we to do? Well, Scripture gives us the secret. It tells us in Ephesians 5:11, have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. How many of you here feel ready, feel prepared to expose these things? It's a difficult thing, and it's a very narrow space to work within, because when the rubber meets the road, when the moment of truth comes, and you're invited to a dinner, and you know that what's being served is not the best, how do you handle it? Right? It's a very tricky situation. And you need as much support and as much help and as much truth on your side as possible. So the simple answer is that, as we talked about with the dollar bills or with the $100 bills, we cannot identify the counterfeit if we do not know the truth. So we're going to start with what is truth. Here it is, plain and simple. God created our bodies to heal. This truth is something that needs to be on the dashboard of your mind every single day. Because as we go about our life, when we leave these doors and we go out into the world, the messages that contradict this are everywhere. And I'll speak to that in just a little bit. But this is God's law of health. Just like there's a law of gravity, and we sort of know gravity, the law of gravity, by saying what goes up must come down. The law of health has a very similar saying. Whoever gets sick must heal. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, but think about this. The law of health, the way God created our bodies, if you are sick, if you are ill, it's because there is something interfering with the power within you to heal. And what is that something? Well, it could be many things. It could be toxicity. We could be exposed to carcinogens or toxins. Or it could just be our lifestyle, our habits. It could be the food that we eat. So since we're on the topic of food, we're going to focus on that. I want to emphasize, before we get into that, I want to emphasize just how abundant Scripture is in terms of communicating that truth to us. In Psalms 103:3, the Lord heals all our diseases. In Psalm 41:3, the Lord restores us. In Matthew 4:23, Jesus went about healing. In Luke 6:29, power from Jesus was healing them. In Proverbs 4:20-22, my words bring life and healing. And this is just a sampling of the Scripture that validates, that supports, and that encourages us to believe and have faith that it is God who heals us. So if you hear any messages to the contrary, it's a lie. So I want to elaborate on this a little bit. And as it relates to food, I just want to say that food either promotes healing or inhibits it. That's a truth that I want you to take with you. If there's anything else that you get from tonight, I want you to memorize this, to learn this, to know this. Everything that you put into your mouth either promotes healing or inhibits it. Now, it could be a mystery as to how that functions. I'm not going to get into that, but the fact remains, the truth remains is that there is healing power in the plant foods that God created for us. And so if we are diseased, it is because something is interfering with our body's ability to heal. And I'm going to go a step further and say that disease, if we are healthy, if you are in optimal health within the context of this fallen world, disease has no choice but to submit to the power of health. So what we call disease is really the body's healing mechanisms revealing itself, alerting you to a problem. I'm going to say that again because this is very key. What we call disease is, in reality, in truth, the body's healing mechanisms at work to restore health. Does that make sense? I'm going to share with you this quote from Ellen White, where she says this succinctly. Disease is an effort of nature to free the system from conditions that result from a violation of the laws of health. So let me give you some examples. Let's take inflammation. If you cut yourself, what happens? You bleed. The body immediately goes into a healing response that we call inflammation. The body produces capillaries. We call it angiogenesis. And it floods the wound with capillaries to bring nutrition to that wound. It gets inflamed, it's red, and it's sensitive to the touch, right? It hurts. That is not a disease. That is a healing mechanism. The body immediately went into healing mode, created the capillaries, the wound gets red, it's sensitive to the touch, and we should be wise to respect that process. We are wise to cooperate with that process. As time goes on, the wound heals and we're left with a scar. So if inflammation is a healing mechanism on the outside, why would it not be a healing mechanism on the inside? Why is it that medical science tells us that inflammation on the inside is a disease? Is it that they don't fully understand God's law of health? Or is it that they have another agenda? I'm not here to point fingers, but I just want you to think about that. Because it is incompatible to God's law of health for the body to produce disease at the same time that it's producing healing. Are you understanding this? Let me say that again. It is incompatible. It is contrary to God's law of health for the body to produce disease at the same time that it's designed to heal. When God created Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, there was no disease. There is disease. Why? Because they sinned, they were separated from God. Now, there are causes of disease, but the body does not produce disease by that law. And we are wise to think about that and understand that. Now, does that sound confusing to some of you? A little bit. Let me give you another example. Osteoporosis. What is osteoporosis? Brittle bones, right? All right. So osteoporosis is a condition that is created when we subject our bodies to acid-forming foods over a prolonged period of time. Let me give you an example, or let me explain it a little bit differently. Our bodies are designed to maintain a constant temperature of 98.6, right? Everybody knows that. When we go out into extreme cold and the body is overwhelmed by that cold, the body then begins to restrict the blood flow to the extremities. Why? To protect the vital organs. That is not a disease. That is a compensation mechanism. It is a survival mechanism that is consistent with God's law of health. So the same is true with our blood pH. Our bodies are designed to maintain a blood pH of about 7.3, 7.4 on the acid alkaline scale. But when we consume the standard American diet day in, day out, year after year after year, the body has no choice but to leach calcium out of the bones to neutralize that pH. And that's what causes osteoporosis. Osteoporosis is not going to be reversed or healed with any medication. And until we stop eating all of the inflammatory foods and the high acid forming foods, the law of sowing and reaping is going to work against us. Does that make sense? I'm going to share one more. How many of you been to the beach? Okay. Has anybody ever swallowed a gulp of seawater? What happens? Right? It comes out. There's about 20,000 milligrams of sodium in 2 ounces of seawater. The body recognizes that amount of salt and that amount of time as toxic, and it induces vomiting to get it out safely. But what would happen if you took that 2 ounces of seawater and you sipped it throughout the day? Would it still be toxic? Yes, of course it would. But the body would employ a different compensation mechanism. It will retain water so that it can safely eliminate it through urine or sweat throughout the day or the days that follow. How many of you ever been to a restaurant and come out with puffy fingers? There's just too much salt in the food. Does that make sense? So this is a law. These are examples of God's law of health that we need to cooperate with, that we need to understand and we need to cooperate with. And we need to believe that we have the power, we have the choice, right, to cooperate with that law. So this is going to sound, I know that for some people, and I didn't take a survey to see who's in the medical profession, but I know that this, it kind of rubs the narrative the wrong way. And I'm going to tell you why. Medical science has defined health in a way that is contradictory to God's law of health. And let me explain that. If you go to National Institutes of Health website, for example, they define health as the absence of disease. Does that sound bad or wrong? The truth is that disease is the absence of health in the same way that darkness is the absence of light. And all of God's laws that govern life on planet Earth have his signature. And when we understand these, when we look at them in this way, we begin to understand how the medical definition of health is backwards. Now, whether they did it intentionally or not, that's not what I want to get into. But I just want to emphasize that we need to understand, we need to distinguish the difference. We need to distinguish between the counterfeit and the real. And this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where we can begin to understand and shift our thinking and believe God's law of health more than medical science. So let me explain this a little bit more. When it comes to the laws of physics on planet Earth, as I said, they all have God's signature, and they work like this. With light, as I said, there is no source of darkness. There is simply the absence of light. With heat, there is no source of cold. There is simply the absence of heat. Nothing produces cold. There's just the absence of heat. The same thing is true with sound or music. There is no source of silence. There is merely the absence of sound or music. And the same is true in the spiritual realm. There is no source of hate. There is simply the absence of love, because love and hate cannot coexist. And Scripture is clear that fear, 1 John 4:18, I believe it says, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. This is God's signature laws that have been distorted when it comes to health. Because medical science wants us to believe, or has told us, that health is the absence of disease, suggesting that if disease had its way, it would have power over your health. But that is a lie, because it is inconsistent with all of God's laws. It's like saying darkness is the absence of light. Well, I'm sorry, let me say that backwards. Light is the absence of darkness, right? Because the truth is that darkness is the absence of light. I had that turned around. And the same is true with all of the other laws that govern life on planet Earth. I know it's a lot to sort of get your mind around, but it'll come around again. And this truth is foundational for us to now get into the 4 ways to survive the season. And what I want you to understand and what I want you to realize is that God's truth, they defy the current. They defy the medical scientific narrative. And so we need to figure out, we need to decide, what are we going to do with this? How does this apply to my life? So I'm going to use the acronym DEFY to help you remember these 4 ways. So the first one is discern. The second one is endure. The third one is focus. And the fourth one is yearn. And we're going to go through these one by one. Let's start with this one. Discern. What does that mean? We just need to know the difference. We need to distinguish between right and wrong. What is that saying? I think it's attributed to Rick Warren, but I believe it's Booker T. Washington that said, lies do not become truth. Evil does not become good. And wrong does not become right just because it is accepted by the majority. Do you all remember that statement or that quote? And so one of the things that is critical for us to understand is that the worst kind of lie is the one that's a half-truth. So I'm going to share with you 4 half-truths of our health and dieting world. How many of you were during the Best Way program? All right, and you lost some weight, maybe? Okay, I hope you did. Well, I'm going to share with you 4 of the myths that are pervasive in the dieting and weight loss world. The first one is this: you eat too many calories. Now, this is a half truth. It is partly correct. But it is more accurate to say that it is not about too many calories. It is about insufficient nutrition. Because if all you did was to nourish your body with whole plant foods, the kind that you have to chew really well before you get it down, it would be virtually impossible to overeat calorically. Are you following me? Does that make sense? The second one, the second myth or half-truth is that you're too heavy. You just weigh too much. The number on the scale is not your friend, and you got to change that number. Again, it's partially true, right? It's a half-truth. But it is more accurate to say that it is not about excess weight. It's about excess fat. Because you could be thin and metabolically obese. What do I mean by that? The weight could be normal, but the ratio of lean tissue to fat tissue is unnatural and unhealthy. And you see that with some marathon runners. There are some marathon runners that are super thin, super skinny, but they are still unhealthy. They go and eat junk and they burn it off. Inconsistent with God's law of health. Number 3, the third myth or half-truth. You eat junk food. All right, this is a little bit more, right? Full truth and half-truth. But it's more accurate to say that it's not about the fact that you eat junk food or that we eat junk food, because I need to include myself in this scenario, but it's why we eat it. And the truth is that we eat ill-nourishing food, tasty treats, because we're addicted, plain and simple. And if weight loss programs were only honest about the addiction issue, they would have greater success. I was a CHIP facilitator for 3.5 years. For those of you who don't know, CHIP stands for Complete Health Improvement Program. And it's a disease prevention program that was founded by Dr. Hans Deal. And in that program, I learned that we're all food addicts to something. Some people have a sweet tooth, some people have a savory tooth, right? We all have our favorite food, our go-to food, our comfort food. And it at a deeper level, it's actually a spiritual issue. It's an idol worship issue. That's a whole other presentation. But my point is that it is more accurate to say that if we struggle with eating junk food, we need to be honest with what are our addictions. Myth number 4, half-truth number 4. You're just too inactive. You don't get enough exercise. Again, it is partially true. However, it is more accurate to say that it's not about infrequent exercise or insufficient exercise or too much inactivity. It is about infrequent detoxification. And I'll tell you why. Exercise is not essential for weight loss. Now, I know I'm going to get some eyebrows raised on this one, but I'm going to say it again. Exercise is not essential for weight loss. Exercise is essential for metabolic health. And metabolic health is essential for the reduction of excess fat. Because if you were healthy, metabolically healthy, your body would naturally shed those unwanted and excess fat cells. So, what are the myths or what are the issues with the holidays? One of the things that I hear quite often when I'm working with clients is this idea that, well, I've been on a diet and I can't eat that. I want that, but I can't eat it because I'm on this diet. Can anybody relate? Okay. So what's at the core of that statement? What is really behind that statement? What's really happening is that the individual doesn't really have control, but they're just doing it because the diet said so. I can't have that, right? I want that, but I can't have it. That's revealing to the issue of food addiction, right? I want that, but I can't have it because I'm on this diet. So at the core of this issue of that statement is a victim mentality. Because if you were truly in control, if you were able to make wise decisions, then you wouldn't say that. You would say, I can have that, but I don't want it. You see the difference? There's a significant difference in that. And that confidence comes from understanding God's law of health and us being empowered by his truths to be able to make wise choices at the moment of truth. And believe you me, it is not easy. It is extremely difficult. And all of us, we're all in the same boat. So the next one is endure. And as I said, this is tough. It's hard. So understand that for you to succeed at getting through the holidays, you need to endure the pressure. You need to endure the pain. What pain am I talking about? Withdrawal symptoms. I used to drink coffee when I was in college. I loved coffee. Kona was my favorite. Kona coffee. There's nothing smoother than Kona coffee. After I graduated from college and I was working, I didn't need to stay up late anymore. And I tried several times to quit drinking the caffeine. Oh man, I can't tell you how painful those headaches were. I felt like my head was going to explode. It took me like 3 or 4 times over the course of 2 years to finally, okay, that's it. I'm done. So understand what you're up against. If you have a food addiction, there's going to be some withdrawals. There's going to be changes. Your taste buds are going to change. And some things that used to taste good, if you stick with it, eventually, they're not going to taste good that as much. So getting through the holidays successfully requires that you stand firm to what you believe is true and have faith. We're going to play another little game. So I want all of us to understand what we're up against. Endure for how long? Right? That's the question. How long do I have to endure? Let's just say that pizza is your favorite food. I like to pick on pizza because, everybody likes pizza, right? So I'm going to ask this question. How many of you can go 6 days without pizza? Keep your hands up. All of you, right? All of you. Okay. Keep them up. 6 days without pizza. About 6 weeks. Okay? You're honest. I like that you're honest. That's good. How about 6 months? Could you go 6 months? Okay. It's getting a little harder now. What about 6 years? Really? You could go 6 years? This gift is for you.
It's not a slice of pizza. I usually was.
Sam, can I say something about that?
Sure.
One of the things you haven't talked about yet, but I imagine you're getting to it. It just brings me so much joy to know that when we endure something or when we say no to something that we know that really we know isn't good for our bodies, there's another joy that far more compensates for that when we are obeying what Scripture tells us, deny ourselves. And to me, that has helped me so enormously to get over things like pizza and everything else. Because God gives us that tremendous joy when we're following what He says.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I will mention something to that effect a little bit later. But yes, suffice to say that getting through the holidays successfully requires commitment and requires faith. And so James 1, 2-3 sort of captures what's going on. Consider it pure joy. You mentioned joy. My brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. So when you feel that you're enduring this pressure, right, to change how you see food, to change your relationship to food, there is a reward. There is a benefit. And Scripture helps us to understand that. The third way to survive the holidays is to focus. There's a saying in a book written by John Templeton, and I believe the title of the book was The Laws of Life. In that book, there is what is now a famous quote that says, "A successful problem solver is one who creates a new context from which to view the problem." So let me explain that a little bit. This is common sense, actually. When you take your car to the mechanic, the auto repair shop, they have auto creepers and they have auto lifts. Why? Well, if you take your car in because it's smoking and they can't see where the smoke is coming from when they're looking, from the hood, looking down, they get underneath or they lift the car. That's what it means to create a new context. So what does that mean for you? How can you create a new context to think about the challenges that you have as it relates to food? Maybe it requires fasting, prayer. I mean, those are obviously the most powerful. But it could be getting away, going on a trip, and committing that, okay, on this trip, I'm going to refrain from eating X, Y, and Z. Whatever it is, you have to keep your focus on why. Why am I doing this? So you have to focus on the why. Focus on health, not flavor. Focus on nutrient density rather than calorie density. Focus on God's law of health. Focus on the supreme sacrifice that Christ made for you and I. That should give us the motivation to keep our focus. and then incorporate practical strategies. What I'm giving you today, hopefully, are some practical strategies, some fresh perspectives, but also some practical strategies that you can employ. And I'm going to give you one at the end of the presentation that you can take tonight. But understand that it is whole plant foods, minimally processed, that your body is programmed to respond to the best, that is going to trigger healing. Now, what I mean by this is if you take, say, some baby greens and you put some frozen blueberries and you put maybe some walnuts or some coconut or something and you make a smoothie, that is pretty much, it's processed. Yeah, you blended it into a smoothie, but you're still getting the symphony of nutrients from the food as it was grown. So when I make reference to food, whole plant foods, I'm talking about food as it was grown. Apple pie is a processed food, even if you made it at home. Could you make it healthier? Sure you could, absolutely. Maybe you use dates instead of sugar and you mash them up and you use that to sweeten it. Whatever it is, there's lots of strategies and the internet is full of these recipes. But my point is that you need to have your focus on why. Why am I doing this? And that why needs to be with you every single day, at every meal, with everything that you put in your mouth. Because again, food either promotes healing or inhibits it at every single meal. Again, Scripture gives us the why. 1 Corinthians 10:31. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. You are bought at a price. You are not your own. So you treat your body accordingly. Okay, the last one, 4. You got to want it, plain and simple. You have to want it. Want it enough to be able to take a step of faith. Because faith without works is what? Dead. You can believe it all you want. But if you do nothing, it means nothing. It does nothing. So you have to want it enough to take action. So I'm going to help you to sort of get some scriptural foundation with this idea of yearning. In James 1:12, it says, "Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him." We need to yearn for wisdom. Proverbs 8:11 says, "For wisdom is more precious than rubies, and nothing you desire can compare with her." Facts are not wisdom. And until you know the truth, until we know the truth, we will be deceived, because the devil is a master at facts. He deceived Eve with the facts that the fruit was good for food, it was appealing to the eye, and it was good for gaining knowledge. Those were facts of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the devil is a master at giving us those facts at the same time that he's distorting the truth. And if we are not grounded in that truth, we will be deceived. Yearn for knowledge, same idea. A wise person is hungry for knowledge, while the fool feeds on trash. Proverbs 15:14. We need to yearn for transformation. You got to want it. You got to want to change. And this is where it becomes a spiritual issue. This is where if we don't sacrifice our own desires for the sake of honoring God with our bodies, then it's not a transformation, and we're fooling ourselves. And Scripture is very clear on this. God cannot be mocked. Yearn for courage. If you think you have it hard, go on a missions trip to a third world country and understand what other people, how they live. There are many, many people, millions and millions of people all over the world that have only one meal a day, and it's just rice. We don't have it hard here. But if you need courage, then ask for it. Yearn for humility. And this is one of my favorite texts. Proverbs 3:7-8 says, do not be wise in your own eyes. That's where the humility comes in. Fear the Lord and shun evil. This will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones. Have you ever wondered why it mentions bones? This is something that has always intrigued me until I looked it up. Do you know what physiological functions, one of the physiological functions your bones have? Hematopoiesis. I think I said that right. Hematopoiesis. What happens in your bones is your body creates blood cells and platelets, white blood cells and red blood cells. Now, do you think that this was just a coincidence? Now that you understand the function of bones, let's read that again and see if it doesn't have greater impact. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. This will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones. Does it make a difference knowing what happens in your bones? Does that have a greater impact? Absolutely. And when I read this, I immediately think of the example that I gave you about osteoporosis. There's a direct connection there. So we cannot fool God. We cannot mock God's law of health. It will catch up with us. So one of the final thoughts that I want to share with you is that I believe that you are not here by mistake. I believe that God has called you to be the light to someone during this holiday season, and you are not here by mistake. That's what I believe. And I'm going to leave you with one last thought. But I want to get an idea from everybody here in this room. How many are ready to take the next step? How many are ready to do something today with what we've learned? Anybody? Okay, great. I want you to get out a pen and a paper or use your note app on your phone. And we're going to do this together. And I'm going to give you some powerful words for you to be able to defy the status quo of the holiday traditions and master the food temptations. Before I do, I want to share a quick story to give you some context. So as I said, our words have power. Proverbs 18:21 says, the tongue has the power of life and death. And I realized this many years ago when I had an office and an office manager. We had a space that was maybe about half the size or a third the size of this room. Her desk was there, my desk was here. It was open. We could hear each other. Whenever she was on the phone, I could hear her conversation. Whenever I was on the phone, she could hear my conversation. And so it was very intimate in that respect. So we could hear each other. After several months, I began to notice a pattern. And she would mumble under her breath. What is she saying? I kept asking myself, what is she saying? And she would mumble under her breath. Well, weeks would go by and I'd hear it again. She's mumbling something, right? Finally, I caught what it was that she was saying. And she was working on some numbers. She was my office manager, so she was doing something relating to contracts or invoices or something. And she would say, how could I be so stupid? Why am I such an idiot? And I realized that's not right. I knew enough then to know the power of your words. And so I told her, Mary, I think was her name, don't use those words. You're not stupid. You're not an idiot. You made a mistake? Okay, you made a mistake. But people that have that internal dialogue where they speak these words that are abundant in our culture. Again, the victim mentality is rampant in our culture out there. And there's all of these little sayings, these little words, right, that we feel entitled. It's my right. Did you know that the devil started the first angels' right movement in heaven? Right? Okay, that's a whole other topic. I have a whole other presentation on that. But suffice to say that be careful with the words that you speak. And so I'm going to give you some words that you can take home tonight and begin to use the power of your words right away to make a change tonight and tomorrow. Are you ready? By the way, I wanted to mention that we're all in this together. I love this quote by Jim Rohn. It is not the blowing of the wind that determines your destination. It is the set of your sails. So the words that I'm going to give you are going to empower you to make some adjustments at home, to set your sails to be able to get through the storm a little bit better. Ready? Here we go. Write this down. I feel hungry. Okay? Here's the next one. I need to nourish. Now, let me explain this. The first part, I feel, what do we say when we're hungry? I'm hungry. We don't say it that way in Spanish. Yo tengo hambre is in Spanish. I am not the representation of hunger. I am not hunger. So I don't know if it's incorrect grammar or not, but I am hungry doesn't really mean anything, right? Because do you know the difference between hunger and a craving? If you've never been on a fast, if you've never been without food for a long period of time, like the majority of the world population, we have no clue, we have no idea what it means to feel hunger. Every time I drive past In-N-Out Burger, right, I smell the French fries, I get a craving. That's not hunger, it's a craving. But if you've never fasted, if you've never gone without food for more than 4 hours, then I highly encourage you to go on a fast. If anything, just for the sake of understanding how it feels for your stomach to be truly empty and what it truly means to feel hunger. Because now you can say, I feel hungry. Not I am hungry, I feel hungry. Does that make sense? Okay. Now the next part. What do we say? What's the most common thing that we say? I'm hungry, let's go out to eat. Let's go eat, right? We use that word eat. Well, that doesn't help us at all because we could eat anything. You could eat junk, right? We could eat healthy. We could eat anything. There's nothing in that word eat that really helps us. But if we change the word to nourish, now what have we done? We've eliminated a good 90% of the choices out there because only whole plant foods nourish. So when you go about the holidays and you got a choice in front of you, it's the moment of truth. You have to decide how much of this calorie-dense pie can I have before it overpowers the rest of the nourishment that I put into my body. If you need to have, take a spoonful, take a tablespoon of pie, and then have a big plate of vegetables. You're making a better choice than if you ate the whole piece of pie. Are you following? Because your focus is on nourishment. Every bite either promotes healing or inhibits it. Was that helpful?